Think of somebody who represents the group of people or a representative of a group of people that you have some just dislike or fear of. And imagining them in front of you, see how they appear to your mind to be quite solid. You know, your concept of that person is, this is who they are, and they're just those characteristics that you don't like about the group are just in them inherently, mixed oneness. And so let's investigate to see how that person actually exists. They appear one way to us. Let's see if they exist in the way they appear. So that person that you dislike or fear so much, are they their body? Sometimes it might be their body that is the thing that makes us distrust and fear them. But just ask yourself if the person is the same as the body. And if you feel it is, then try and find what part of the body is that person. Or what part of the body gives you the impression that you, of that category of person that you dislike so much. And then examine their mind. And are they their mind? Can you find that person who has that qualities that you just can't stand in a certain group of people? Are they their mind? Or perhaps the person is something other than either the body and the mind. It's something separate from the body and mind that is just so disgusting. If so, what is that? What are you going to identify as being that person? And if you can't find exactly who that person is anywhere, then just let the image you have of that person totally dissolve. Because that image doesn't refer to anything that's real. There's no base to support that view of that solid person. And then when you focus on imagining that person in front of you again, just think they're a conditioned phenomena. Yeah. They were born who they were born as due to causes and conditions, not because they willed it or they had the power alone to make it be like that. And after they were born, they were conditioned by their family, the society, their health, so many things. So they're a completely conditioned phenomena. And they're conditioned by afflictions and karma. So they're not conditioned by anything pure, but by, afflictions and polluted karma. So isn't that an object of compassion? And so with compassion for all the living beings in the whole mess that we're in, let's generate the strong aspiration to realize the nature of reality, free ourselves from this mess, and then be able to best benefit all others, and to benefit them even before we free ourselves, just in whatever way we can. So then you can see right there how the view of emptiness helps to overcome the grasping, which lies at the root of our anger, our fear, our attachment, and so on. So I thought I'd start with responding to a couple of questions this morning. So what is a blissful self? Well, I don't know from direct experience. And also, philosophically, they say such a thing does not exist, in the sense that a blissful self is one of the characteristics of this permanent, partless, independent self that is held on to, that is believed in by some of the non-Buddhists. Yeah. And so how they describe why that self is blissful, I don't know. Maybe it's primordially blissful. Yeah. It's a Hindu idea, so you can look it up there. So His Holiness says the 7 awakening factors are called correct because they have been transformed into the Arya path. What does it mean that they have been transformed into the Arya path? When we first start practicing these 7, we are ordinary beings. Our mind is not an Arya path. So as we practice these 7, and when we gain a direct realization of selflessness, or in the Theravada tradition, when you have a glimpse of nirvana, then your mind has the Arya wisdom. You become an Arya, so those factors become part of the Arya path. A path is a consciousness. So the 7, were mental factors, and now they become mental factors that are part of your unpolluted mind. Now, Aryas don't have totally, put it this way, learning Aryas who are not Buddhas, don't have totally unpolluted minds. When they come out of meditative equipoise, ignorance, the latencies of ignorance cause the perception or appearance of inherent existence. So, and their minds still have the seeds of karma, polluted karma on them. So not all consciousnesses of Aryas are unpolluted, but here they would be part of the unpolluted consciousnesses of Aryas. So, specifically the wisdom realizing emptiness. What are the causes and conditions that bring about rapture and pliancy? These, you start out, all the causes and conditions that bring about serenity, because pliancy is one of the causes of serenity. Rapture is one of the results of serenity. So what are the causes of serenity? First, we start out with removing the 5 faults by practicing the 8 antidotes, and then by exerting effort in, our practice to stabilize the mind, then progressing through the 9 stages of sustained attention, and then going beyond that to generate mental and physical pliancy and the bliss of physical and mental pliancy. Okay, so just following the instructions on how to generate serenity, that's the cause. So pliancy removes all mental and physical discomfort and unserviceability, making the body and mind flexible, blissful, and capable of engaging in virtue. Is this virtue unpolluted? It's only unpolluted if the being who has that serenity is an Arya. If in ordinary beings can attain serenity, and that bliss is not totally unpolluted because the mind still has ignorance. However, that bliss is considered something virtuous and something to be aimed for, because when you experience it, it certainly encourages your practice, but it's not something to get attached to. Yeah, that's the thing that sometimes, wait a minute, it's virtuous, it shouldn't have any pollution. But pollution means it's under the influence of ignorance, or even sometimes it means the latencies of ignorance. Yeah, so as long as that's in the mind is somehow polluted. Yeah, because the mind doesn't see reality as it is all the time, only in meditative equipoise, on emptiness. Okay, so we had mentioned before that, in Madhyamaka philosophy, they talk a lot about the object of negation. I have some vague memory that it was J. Rinpoche who coined that term. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It would be, in studying about emptiness, to me it's very interesting to see who coined what kind of terms and who developed and when developed different schemas and so on, and how they trace themselves. Because it's very clear, for example, like in the Pali tradition, that they have an object of negation, that the meditation on selflessness is refuting, but they don't have that term, object of negation. Yeah. So once you have the term, object of negation, it makes the whole meditation different. Yeah. Even though you may have had an object of negation before without the term. Yeah. So I find these things kind of interesting. Even the term true existence, when did that come in? Yeah. I did a search in, Nagarjuna's Karikas, and I didn't find the term true existence. So where did that come in? Yeah, I know it. The Pali Abhidhammikas started using it at a certain point historically. I can't remember when, but they didn't have exactly the same definition that the Madhyamikas have of true existence. Okay. So the term that became more popular was svabhava, which is usually inherent existence or intrinsic existence. But again, in the very early sutras, I don't know if that term was used. I have to look at that again. I can't remember exactly. But what you find historically is that the definitions of different terms develop over time, and the meanings change over time. And personally speaking, I find that quite interesting, because it helps me to see that what I've encountered is a product of the evolution, starting with the Buddha, but then of other great thinkers who really clarified different points. And how did they do that? Okay, so the subtlest object of negation is the self. So here, self for Madhyamikas means here I'm talking about the Prasangika Madhyamikas. It means inherent existence. Okay, so it has this very specific meaning. If you're talking about one of the, for Prasangikas has a specific meaning. If you use the term for the Vaibhasikas, the Sautantrikas, one of the other tenet systems, the term has an object of negation, refers to something else. Okay, so inherent existence that does not exist in either persons or phenomena. Nevertheless, ignorance and the view of a personal identity believe this exists. If we want to catch a thief, we have to know what he looks like. Similarly, to refute inherent existence, we need to properly identify the object of negation by having an idea of what inherent existence would be like. Now, this is the tricky point, because, inherent existence doesn't exist. We're trying to refute its existence, and establish the emptiness of its inherent existence. So we have to refute it, we have to know what it would look like, just like to find a thief and evict it, you have to know what it looks like. But since inherent existence doesn't exist, it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what it looks like. Yeah? So, yeah, it's just a funny point in the in the meditation, because we're trying to get a clear idea of what a non-existent would look like. Okay? So, but we do our best by looking inside, using the words of the Buddha and the sages, and to look inside and see what kind of feeling or view we have that corresponds to what we think the meaning of those words refers to. Okay, so Chandrakirti says, here what we call self refers to any nature or state that objects could have in which they rely on nothing else. The non-existence of this is what we call selfless. So you have to try and get an idea of what something would look like that doesn't rely on anything else. And to find that view within yourself of how you think of yourself, how you think of your body or mind or other people. What does it mean that they appear to exist in and of themselves without depending on any other factors? So I know for me, to get that feeling, I have to think about, well, what do they look like when I think that they do depend on other factors? And then what's the opposite of that? That's one way I approach it. Okay. So Tsongkhapa defines inherent existence this way. What exists objectively in terms of its own essence, without being posited through the power of a subjective mind, is called self or inherent nature. So those words, the objective, something exists objectively, that gives me a little bit more feeling. When I think of objective existence, it's like something out there that's unrelated to me. Okay. Now, of course, when I think of myself existing objectively, myself is not out there, unrelated to me. But what would an objective self look like? What would that feel like? Well, it's something that's just there by its own power. Yeah? It doesn't need causes and conditions, doesn't need anything else. It's just there. Now that feeling I can track a little bit in my mind. Yeah? Do you have a feeling sometimes that you're just there? Yeah? There's no thought about what caused me. Yeah, there's no thought at all that we're a caused phenomena. We're just there. That's all. Independent. Always have been, always will be. Yeah? Do you have that kind of feeling inside you about yourself? Yeah? So that can, give us a little bit of a feeling about maybe what an objective self is. Maybe what a self, that in which it relies on nothing else, but its own essence. Kind of like, do you ever have this feeling of like this I inside of you that's just screaming, me? Do you ever have that feeling inside? Yeah. Just me. That's all that exists in this world. Me. I. Yeah. So, that kind of feeling. Yeah. So it must be something along that way, yeah? So to understand this subtlest object of negation, it is helpful first to identify the three levels of erroneous conceptions, each with its own object of negation regarding the person. So from the coarsest to the subtlest. Okay, first one is misconceiving the person to be permanent, unitary, and independent from its causes. So that's the view of the non-Buddhists: permanent, unitary, independent. And they say that this one is an acquired affliction in the idea, in the sense that we made up this notion of a permanent, unitary, independent self that's independent from its causes. Now, I remember at the beginning when I was looking, when I look at my sense of I feel quite permanent. I feel quite independent from my causes, and I feel quite unitary. And I don't think anybody taught me that. That feels kind of innate in a way. But this one is an acquired one. So what that means is, the one that comes spontaneously in us is more of a feeling of maybe substantial existence or inherent existence, but it has those other qualities tacked onto it as well, But here we're talking about just the idea of a permanent, partless, independent I that is created by philosophers. Okay. Now, if we were taught this idea when we were kids, then maybe that's why it feels so natural to us as adults. I'm a permanent, partless, independent soul. Okay? Except the idea of a soul is a little bit different than that feeling that comes up on a daily basis, isn't it? Yeah. When you think about, when you were a little kid and you learned about a soul. Yeah, you have a soul.
Impersonal. It wasn't personal.
It's something. Well, I felt it very personal. This is the core of me. You felt it impersonal. How did you? You felt it personal. But to me, the idea of soul, I learned, it was very personal. But it also was separate from the me that went to school and that played games and everything else. My soul was some other level of existence or some other level of who I was. Does it feel that way to you? Yeah. Yeah, so that's showing right there that our ordinary daily one that we had even as kids is not the same as this acquired idea of a soul that we learned. Your soul that God created, that God was going to do something with. I never quite figured that out. He takes it home to himself, but I don't know. That whole thing never made sense to me. But, but there was this idea, okay? So that's the one that's acquired, that was made up by human beings' conceptual mind, okay? But, some of the things that if we learn them early on, they are very deeply rooted in ourselves. And so this idea of a soul could be very deeply rooted in some of us. Okay? Even though it's acquired. Yeah. It's kind of like anger. There's an acquired form of anger and there's an innate form of anger. So even before we learn much about the world, just as infants, we would get angry. I'm hungry. I'm angry. Okay? So that's just more the innate kind that just came, we hadn't learned much. Yeah, unpleasant sensation, angry response. Okay. Then, when we got older, we learned how to hate. Our parents, our society taught us how to hate different types of individuals, how to fear different types of individuals. True or untrue? Yeah, true, isn't it? As little kids, when we were little kids on a playground, we played with anybody. Yeah. Then when we learn from adults, be careful of kids who look like this, or be careful of kids who live in this neighborhood, or be careful of kids whose parents do da-da-da-da-da. Then we learned fear and, in response to anger, hatred. In response to fear, hatred. Yeah, that we had no idea of when we were toddlers, because you put a bunch of toddlers together, and they're fine. They may throw some sand at each other if they get mad, but they're not. They don't have this acquired hatred, acquired prejudice that we were taught by families and societies and so on. But you can see how sometimes if people learn this kind of acquired anger or prejudice early on, it's very, very deeply rooted. Yeah. Look at I was going to say the Sunnis and the Shiites, but that's kind of unfair to use the Islams. We have a joke in the Jewish community. You always have two temples, the one you go to and the one you don't. Because people can't get along. You have to have one that you don't go to. Okay. Look at Christianity. What's the famous joke about, what was it? A mother superior sending her nuns out to be independent and, learn the ways of the world. And when they came back, and, she asked them what they experienced. And one of her junior nuns says, well, I became a prostitute, and Mother Superior fainted. And when she came back together, back conscious again, she said, what did you say? And the young nun said, well, I became a prostitute. And she said, oh, I'm so relieved. I thought you said you became a Protestant. So, this kind of hatred, look what happened in Yugoslavia, how the people were fighting each other. Why? Because 300, 500 years ago, when none of them were alive, their ancestors fought each other. So that means that now in this life you have to fight each other. So this is the learned kind. But you can see if it's learned early on, it has a lot of power. Yeah? Okay. So that's the first level, okay, of we're talking about here the misconceptions of the self. The second is grasping the I as self-sufficient, substantially existent. which we'll describe a little later. And the third is grasping the I as inherently existent. All of these superimpose a false motive of existence, an object of negation, on the I. Disproving them is like peeling away layers of an onion. Yeah, we first negate the first level, then the second level, then the third level, until there's nothing left, until only their absence. Okay? The phenomena's emptiness of existing in these erroneous ways, only that remains. The belief in a permanent, unitary, independent self is the conception of the Atman accepted by non-Buddhists. As explained above, the core of the person, and this is very interesting, the core of the person is seen as permanent, while the aggregates are considered impermanent and disposable. Okay? When you learned about a soul, your soul was permanent. It went from one life to the next. But you learned that your body and mind were impermanent, from ash, from ashes and dust to dust, yeah? Okay, so your body and mind were impermanent, but your soul goes from one life to the next, okay? So the relationship of the self and the soul is like a porter and a load. In each lifetime, the self picks up and discards aggregates. Some people believe this permanent self or soul goes from life to life, appropriating new aggregates each lifetime. Others believe it becomes non-existent after death. This view does not arise in our minds innately. It is acquired by studying erroneous philosophies. But do you sometimes, when you think about yourself, you feel like there's a core that's really you and your body and mind change? Yeah, like, okay, at death, yeah, I'm going to lose this body, the worms will eat it. My mind, I'm in the process of losing it now. Yeah, but I will transmigrate to the next life. Yeah, an English-speaking I, that has all the conceptual abilities that I do right now as an adult, will be able to calmly lead myself through the death process without freaking out, calmly describe to myself that now I'm in the intermediate stage and these are only appearances to the mind. Calmly to describe to myself, now I am entering the womb and becoming a baby, and I'll be here for 9 months, and then I'm going to come out and get born. And, they'll whack me on my bottom when I'm born. So there's going to be this me who knows the whole story, who's going to prepare me to undergo this, so I know exactly what's happening, even though I can't control it all. Do you ever have that kind of feeling of yourself? Yeah, I think that's more the self-sufficient, substantially existent one. Yeah, but underlying it, the grasping at inherent existence. Okay, but it's interesting how that idea, that feeling just comes so naturally, doesn't it? Okay, so that one maybe is innate. The view of a self-sufficient, of course, thinking that an English-speaking I is going to describe the whole process, that part's got to be acquired. Okay, because I didn't speak English when I was born, so. Yeah. The view of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self sees the I as the controller and the aggregates as the controlled. The I appears to be self-sufficient in that it can stand on its own, and substantially existent in that it can be identified without one or more of the aggregates appearing to the mind. This grasping has innate and acquired forms. Okay? So the I, it's substantially existent because it can be it cannot be, it can be identified without one or more of the aggregates appearing to the mind. That's, substantially existent. In other words, you can see the I directly without first seeing the body or the mind. Can you know a person identify a person without their body or mind or voice or something appearing to you? No. But this conception feels like there is such a person that can be identified that way. So it's completely opposite to our experience. Okay? And it sees the I to be self-sufficient in that it can stand on its own and, here I am, and substantially existent in that it can be identified without having to identify the body or mind. But there isn't such a person when we stop and think about it. Yeah. Grasping the person as inherently existent sees the I as mixed in with the aggregates, yet able to stand on its own. So this one's harder to identify because it can stand on its own, but it's mixed in with the aggregates. And as soon as you try and find it, it hides behind one of the aggregates and pretends to be one of the aggregates. But the actual inherently existent I that we hold, we don't innately hold it as being one of the aggregates. Okay? The I appears to exist from its own side, under its own power, with its own essence, without being posited by mind. Do you ever think that you exist because you're posited by mind? Do you ever think that you exist because term and conception labeled the collection of this body and mind I? Do you ever feel that? No, we never feel that. I'm here. Yeah. I don't need to be labeled. I'm here. Okay, so this I truly, ultimately, and independently exists. Here, independent does not mean like it did in permanent Unitarian independent. That independent meant independent of causes and conditions. This independent means it doesn't depend on other factors, such as its base of designation, which the collection of the aggregates, and the mind that conceives and designates I, independence upon the collection of the aggregates. This is the view of a personal identity grasping I, and has both acquired and innate forms, the latter being the root of samsara. The view of a personal identity grasping mind arises in relation to things that belong to us, especially the aggregates. It focuses only on the sense of mine, the feeling of myness or ownership. So there's a me that owns these things. Okay. And it holds, that ownership as inherently existent. The absence of an inherently existent I or mind is the selflessness of persons. Okay? So, we hold this idea of myness very strongly. Yeah? And, okay, if you came in here next session and your seat was not here and your table with your book and your computer and, your little empire there, with your water bottle and your glass case and your tissues and the plastic bag you put your used tissues in and your pictures of the Buddhas and your mala and everything else. If it weren't there, you walk in here, everybody else's is here and yours isn't. Okay? Do you have a feeling of mine? This was my seat. My seat. How dare they move my seat? Okay, so that feeling of my as the owner of that seat. Okay? And it feels like inside your little empire there's some minus. Yeah? Because the person who moved your seat did it deliberately. Because they wanted to get your goose. And they did. Because that's my seat. Yeah. There's minus in the table. Yeah. There's minus in the cushion, in the book, in your tissue packet. I have a nice little empire here. It even has speakers so that I can hear myself, so that I don't talk too loud. Yeah? And it has a green tablecloth. If I came in next time and there's no green tablecloth, there's just the painted table with a scratch in it that shows the wood beneath. What happened to my seat and my table? Okay, so that idea of mine that comes. I have another good example. Bear with me, those of you who heard the story. It was years ago. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee. I think this was the first time I met Geshe Dado. And we met outside of the center. And I was teaching the 5 forces from the mind training, And so the 5 forces have to deal with how to generate bodhicitta and generate compassion and so on. So I taught the whole weekend about compassion, bodhicitta, kindness for others, the disadvantages of self-centeredness, the benefits of cherishing others. Wonderful weekend. Okay. Got on the plane from Knoxville to Chicago. That was not too long a flight. That was okay. Then got on the plane from Chicago to Seattle. And I fly a lot, so I make sure to reserve aisle seats. Okay? Because, So I got to my seat in the plane, which was an aisle seat, and this lady was sitting in it. And I said, "Excuse me, I think this is my seat." And she said, "Oh, I know, I have the middle seat, but I'm so uncomfortable in the middle seat. I was really hoping I could change places with you." So me, who just got done talking about the disadvantages of self-centeredness and the benefits of cherishing others, said to this lady, "This is my seat." I don't want to sit from Chicago to Seattle in a middle seat squished between 2 people. I didn't say that part. And then I realized, of course, what I said, and then I backtracked because, oh no, here I am in robes being selfish. That doesn't look too good. And I said, well, how about if we alternate the seat, We'll share the seat. And by that time, she had moved into the middle seat. She said, no, it's okay. So there was that seat, that was my seat. There was this feeling of myness that, was somehow embedded, not even in the cushion and the cloth, but in the space above the cushion and the cloth. That part was mine. Yeah. And I didn't want to give it up. And then I observed as when the plane landed, and you know how after a flight, first thing I do anyway is I stand up. It's like, get me out of this seat. I stood up, and then I stopped caring who sat in that seat. The whole world could have sat in that seat for all I cared. Because like that, the sense of my was gone. Yeah? So at one time, there was myness imbued in that cushion and the space above it that disappeared like that. Yeah, it was so interesting to watch that. And so I felt guilty ever since. So the last flight I was on, actually coming back from California a week or two ago. So that flight, somebody wanted to, there was a husband and wife and they were separated. So I volunteered to switch seats, because she was sitting in the aisle. So we switched seats. She could sit by her husband and I sat on I still had an aisle seat. Then somebody else comes along. She didn't have that aisle seat. She actually had the inside seat. So I happily moved. This was my purification. I moved. I didn't say peep. I moved to the aisle, to the inside seat, and this couple sat in the middle and the seat. And the flight attendant, when she walked by, she said, "Oh, you're really moving around a lot this flight, aren't you?" I think she appreciated, that I had done that. So, so a little ego boost, from the flight attendant. Okay. So, do you see how these things come up in our life? Yeah, that's why I'm telling you these stories, so you can see. This is just natural, everyday occurrence. Grasping the inherent existence of phenomena holds all other phenomena, especially the aggregates, to exist independently of other factors, including their causes and conditions, parts, and the mind that conceives and designates them. The absence of such a self is the selflessness of phenomena. Meditating on the emptiness of phenomena, specifically the aggregates, is essential because as long as we grasp the aggregates as inherently existent, we will also grasp the person as inherently existent, and liberation will elude us. Meditators usually begin by negating the inherent existence of the I, and thereafter the inherent existence of the aggregates. Identifying the object of negation, an inherently existent I, is the first and most difficult step. To do this, one corner of our mind unobtrusively observes how the sense of I manifests in our life. It is easier to do this when grasping at I arises strongly. For example, when we are unjustly blamed or when we strongly crave something. So when there's a strong emotion, there's usually a strong feeling of I. And so we try and identify it, We have that experience. And then with a corner of our mind, we try and identify that experience, how the I appears. If we pay too much attention to it, it hides behind one of the aggregates, and instead it seems to be the body or it seems to be the mind. Okay? So, for example, you might have a feeling like, oh, I'm in pain. Yeah, and you look at how the I appears, I'm in pain. And at first you can get maybe this sense of, this strong, solid I. But then immediately the I hides behind the body. And it seems like the I is the body because the body's the thing that's in pain. Okay? So the trick is to be able to catch it, when it's not hiding behind and pretending to be one of the aggregates. And that's quite difficult. Once we have identified how the false I appears, we need to investigate whether such an I can actually exist. Okay, so we identify this appearance and this feeling of it, but does such a thing exist? Yeah, it's like you can believe in the boogeyman and be afraid of the boogeyman, but does the boogeyman exist? Yeah? Okay, so here reasoning and analysis are critical. We must investigate how the I exists until we are convinced that it cannot exist inherently. At that time, we rest the mind in the absence of an inherently existent self. Okay? So, if you believe in the boogeyman, yeah, do you remember, any of you believe in the boogeyman when you were kids? Were you taught about the boogeyman? Yeah, the boogeyman and the tooth fairy. Yeah, remember those two? Yeah. So the boogeyman came out if you were naughty. Yeah, tooth fairy came out when you lost a tooth to console you. Okay. So if you believe in the boogeyman as a little kid, if somebody just says to you, the boogeyman doesn't exist, does that stop your fear of the boogeyman? No, because you really believe in the boogeyman, and you heard a noise under your bed one night that really solidified your belief. So somebody coming in, even if it's one of your parents, who says there's no such thing as a boogeyman, that doesn't help you at all. Yeah. You have to really see if you can find the boogeyman. So of course you take one of your parents or some trusted person with you in case you do find the boogeyman. Okay, but you look. Yeah, you look under your bed, you look in the closets, you look in the drawers. Yeah, maybe you look in the attic or the basement. You look everywhere. And it's only when you've looked everywhere and you can't find a boogeyman that you finally go, okay, there's no boogeyman, and you relax. But you have to investigate and prove it for yourself that there's no boogeyman. So it's the same here with, realizing emptiness. If we just say to ourselves, oh, there's no I, the I doesn't inherently exist. And then you invent some kind of blissful, spaced out feeling where you're on nothingness, That's not the realization of emptiness. We have to really look and investigate, is there an inherently existent I? Because there sure appears to be one. So there's only two places it can hide out. Either it's in the aggregates or it's separate from the aggregates. So you start examining the relationship between the self and the aggregates to see if you can find this inherently existent self. So now we're coming to the 7-point refutation. So responding to Mara when he tries to interrupt her practice, Vajra Bhikkhuni says, have you noticed that I'm quoting what the Bhikkhuni is saying? But they made important statements. Yeah, they made important statements, but usually when and the following one that we do, it's quoted all the time in the Tibetan tradition. They never say it was said by a bhikshuni. I don't know, maybe they don't know. Yeah, but I made sure people know. So she said, why now do you assume a being? She's saying this to Mara, who's interrupting her practice. Why now do you assume a being? Mara, is that your speculative view? This is a heap of sheer formations, sheer causes and conditions. Here no being is found. Just as with an assembly of parts, the word chariot is used, so when the aggregates exist, there is the convention of being. Yeah, this is from a Pali Sutta. Okay, this sure sounds like Madhyamaka, doesn't it? The simile of the chariot to illustrate not self or selflessness is found in the Pali Suttas and was popularized in the first century text, the Milindapana. Here the monk, which is also in the Pali Canon, here the Buddhist monk Nagasena explains to King Milinda that while none of the parts are the chariot, the collection of the parts arranged in a certain manner is conventionally understood as a chariot. Similarly, the aggregates are not the person. The I is just a convenient designation for the aggregation of momentary material and immaterial processes that constitute the empirical person. Okay, so Chandrakirti took this example right out of, the early suttas. Yeah, so here we see, they may not have been the Pali Suttas because those sutras were more located in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, but the 18 schools shared many of the same sutras. So it was probably taken from one of the sutras that was in Sanskrit or some other, Prakrit language in North India from one of the 18 schools. And that example got passed down. Yeah? Because by the time Chandrakirti came along, he was already 7th century. It was quite late, so that example, I'm sure, must have been prominent and used much, much earlier. Yeah, it was in the early suttas, so it would have been there from the Buddhist time onward in North India. The Madhyamaka Chandrakirti also uses the simile of a chariot in his Madhyamaka Avatara to illustrate that a person is designated independence on the aggregates and does not exist inherently. If a person existed inherently, it should be findable in one of 7 ways. The first 5 ways are those given by Dhammadina in the quotation above. Remember the quotation we went over yesterday? Shall we read it again? An untaught person regards form as self, or self as possessed of form, or form as in self, or self as in form. And then the one not directly mentioned but implied was the self as different from form. And then she went through all 5 aggregates that way. Okay. So it was in the 5 ways, those shown by Dhammadina in the quotation above, and by Nagarjuna in his refutation of an inherently existent Tathagata. So in his Karikas, he said, the Tathagata is neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. So there's 2 positions. The aggregates are not in him, nor is he in the aggregates. He does not possess the aggregates. Okay, so there are the 5 from Nagarjuna. What Tathagata is there then? Okay, and then Chandrakirti added 2 more points to it, which we will go into in the next session. Yeah. It's interesting because they say the people who do well in math do well in debating, because there's some similar kind of investigative process is used. Okay. So if you learn one of the many methods to refute an inherently existent I, is that sufficient, or do you need to go through the other refutations as well? What they say is that if you're following the hearer vehicle, then they usually use one refutation and just stick with that. And that's sufficient to attain liberation. What they say for beings in the Bodhisattva vehicle is that they learn all the different refutations and meditate on all of them. Because this does 2 things. It helps you refute the inherent existence from many different perspectives. Yeah, so your realization is still the same, but it comes about from many different perspectives. And secondly, because bodhisattvas want to be able to teach others the Dharma, if they know and have meditated on all the different reasonings, then they have all those at their fingertips and can teach them to others who may have a tendency towards one over another. Well, they're kind of all mixed together. Yeah, because there's an image of who you are, but there's a feeling, It's like here when I'm using feeling, I don't mean pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling. I mean feeling in the sense of that there's a sense of who I am. So I'm calling that feeling, it's actually a conceptual image, but don't think conceptual image like I'm visualizing it, because it's something much more innate, much more subtle. They say it's how the I appears to you at that time. Okay, so how does the I appear to you? And here we're not talking about how does it appear intellectually, because you can say, oh yeah, there's a feeling of me, and it appears independent from the aggregates, and it appears like it has no causes and conditions, and you intellectualize about it. But if you do that, your refutation is not going to generate any experience. And this is, at the beginning, we have to do it that way just by repeating the formula to us of what an inherently existent I looks like, because we're not in touch even with how things appear to us. Yeah, and that's precisely why usually at the beginning we don't get a lot of feeling for the negation. But the more we get a feeling, or a sense of just our innate, non-verbal feeling of who we are. Yeah, Jeffrey says it beautifully, if this doesn't exist, what does exist? Yeah, and we're so used to our innate non-verbal feeling of who I am, and our whole life is based on it, but it's so typical that we don't even recognize it. Yeah, so it takes some while to recognize what that is. Yeah, right. Okay, so you learn a lot, you study a lot, yeah, but you sit down to do the meditation, and, you have to go to the bathroom immediately. Or you're starving to death, you have to get up and get something to eat immediately, or you need to say some mantra first, and you'll get to that later. Yeah, so resistance. Yeah, of course there's resistance, because our whole life is based on this idea of who we are. And when you really get into the meditation, it challenges that. Yeah, which is why they say that we shouldn't teach this meditation to new people. Yeah, it brings up too much fear in them, especially if they do it. Rather, people need to have a robust understanding of cause and effect, conventional existence, helping to understand veiled truths and ultimate truths. If you understand all of that first, that gives you much more of a foundation when you start to examine how the self exists. Yeah, so that resistance is quite natural. If you're really brave, then you sit and you look at how does the I that's resisting doing this meditation appear? Yeah? How does that I appear? So can be a good start. Or, we need to accumulate merit and do purification. Because when we do those, in addition to getting this broader general understanding, that it underlays our mind and gives us some feeling of stability as we do the meditation. So, purification, accumulation, merit, very useful when you have resistance. Yeah. Yes, that's what it seems like. And I had that question, because the subtlest is appearing, seeing that things depend on term and concept. But they say that you don't really understand that until after you've realized emptiness. Yeah, in the three principal aspects of the path, as Tsongkhapa's talking about that. Yeah, it's only after you realize emptiness, when you come out of that and you see dependent things that then remind you of emptiness, that you can then put the two together. So we don't fully realize that level of dependent arising until after we realize emptiness. Yeah. I asked a lot about that, and that's what I learned, But it feels like, exactly like what you said, because that's the way it's normally explained. Yeah. But usually it's done through through an understanding of dependence, causal dependence, and dependence on parts. But of course, if you have a conceptual understanding of dependence on term and concept, that's going to aid in your meditation. But that's not the actual thing that leads at that point to the direct perception of emptiness. Right. Yes. So you're supposed to be looking at how you appear, but you're stuck in that anger. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a way, you gotta learn to practice where you call up enough anger to notice how the I appears, but not so much that you get stuck in it. Which means you also have to practice some of the antidotes to anger that are on more of the conventional level, like seeing the situation as a result of your karma and so on. So you can call up the anger, but it's not so intense that you just get overwhelmed by it. Yeah, well, the anger's coming right when you're starting to get caught up in it. Ask yourself, how does the I appear to exist right now? Okay, but you have to do it very sneaky with just a corner of your mind, because if you hit it straight on, it hides. Yeah. Okay, so in the meditation we did at the beginning of the session, did other people find, like she did, that you were able to see that you were superimposing qualities either that you had learned as a child on that person, or qualities you don't like in yourself that are so easy to recognize in other people. Yeah.